Chris O'Connor here. Join the Curmudgeon Rock Report's invite-only curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist that pays honor to this episode.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. Earlier this year, the legendary British psychedelic rock band Hawkwind released their 37th studio album, which is not only an astounding number of albums, but an astounding feat of longevity, considering the band has been kicking around for over 50 years. Ostensibly a vehicle for the creativity and vision of singer-guitarist Dave Brock, in the collective's peak and most influential years in the 1970s, no band traversed the cosmos and went as deep into trippy, spacey psychedelia and loopy narratives in their science fiction-derived lyrics as Hawkwind did. However, as Lemmy Kilmister, one-time Hawkwind bassist and later figurehead of the heavy metal band Motorhead, once famously said, Hawkwind were like Pink Floyd with balls. Their pounding, raging guitar riffs managed to touch on both metal and punk, and their churning, hypnotic rhythms aligned them with much of the German progressive rock known as krautrock that was going on at the time. The ultimate band to smoke pot or even trip on psychedelics too, their live shows were spectacles of lasers, mind-expanding light shows, and exotic interpretive dancers in full body paint. Yet, while they, or more specifically Dave Brock, remain icons to this day in the UK and Europe, their popularity never really hit the same level in North America. Nevertheless, numerous bands throughout the years that count themselves in either psychedelic or stoner rock circles owe a debt to them. They have a legacy, but more than anything, they need defending, especially among music fans who may not be familiar with their discography or may be turned off by their nerdy, sci-fi loving reputation. On this episode, we're going to provide 5 reasons as to why they really need to be defended and understood, as well as provide a breakdown of all their 1970s albums, which form the foundation of their legacy. No, folks, you don't need drugs to appreciate and enjoy the music of this awesome band. Welcome to a sober defense of Hawkwind, and welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report.
So I've got to say, Arturo, in preparing for this week's episode, these days I haven't done any kind of drugs in about 6 years. And I actually kind of prefer my sober living and my life with my wife and my dog, and just kind of doing this. It's a lot more even and a lot nicer. But I gotta say, listening to all this Hawkwind, I missed drugs this week several times. I really wish that I had access to mushrooms or I had access to pot. And so I could get off on some of this stuff because sober, it's fantastic. But man, I just remember you turning me on to Hawkwind 15 years ago or like 17 years ago, and like playing me Brainstorm when I was high as hell. And boy, what a memory that was. And I wish I could get just as visceral now. So there you go, boys and girls. I miss drugs. What do you say, Art?
At the very least, weed. When at least listening to Hawkwind. I mean, this is a band that at their peak, their 1970s peak, their music was made and written while they were high, recorded while they were high, performed on stage while they were high.
Yeah, usually on like many on multiple tabs of acid.
The
Yeah.
audience were all high, you
Yeah,
know.
they had some mental illness casualties in that band. No
Definitely,
notes to
yeah.
say. And yeah, as we'll get into it, Space Ritual is like the ultimate payon to drugs or the druggy concert experience. So
Totally, yeah.
yeah, so looking forward to turning people on to Hawkwind. If you're not familiar with them, folks, you're in for a treat. You'll definitely want to check out the Spotify playlist on this one. I'm going to dump all 9 records that we're talking about into that, and it'll be a groovy trip had by all. I'm telling you, man. Right, Art? Otherwise, how else you doing?
Good, good, good. I'm ready to dive into some Hawkwind. But before we do that, we have this other world that we tap into every now and then, don't we?
Yes, we do, and we tap into it every other week, actually, and we go to the other side of the space-time continuum, and we visit what we call the parallel universe. Yes, folks, the parallel universe, where blue is green and black is white and tall is short, which for me would be great at 5'4", and rock and roll was still the thing, man. Rock and roll never went out of style. Rock and roll never went the way of jazz. It's still in the arenas. It's still up on the billboards. It's still on the cover of the Rolling Stone, and people still rock out with their cock out. And they put the lighters in the arenas, and it's a good time, everybody. And that's a nostalgic and kind of clever way of saying that this is the segment of the show where we cover albums and songs by new and newish artists that we think that you would dig and that deserve your attention and that are doing at least interesting things. We don't always agree with each other as to whether or not these things are good. We'll definitely defend our picks this week, but I have a feeling that we might have some opposition on this one.
Yeah.
So, with that said, Arturo, who are you covering in this episode's edition of the Parallel Universe?
Well, one of the consistent aspects of this podcast, especially in our parallel universe segment, is me either being very lukewarm or completely trashing one of Chris's recommendations. Well, now it's your turn to trash mine, Chris, because this record I'm recommending is so not up your alley. I'm talking about the
Uh,
latest by Virginia-based singer-songwriter Lael Neale and her latest album, Altogether Stranger. I reviewed her previous album, Star Eater's Delight, a couple of years ago and gave it a pretty positive review. Her style of dreamy indie pop has a decidedly eerie, lo-fi sound that gives it grit and authenticity, eschewing the overly polished slick glossiness that ruins much of what passes for indie or alternative pop these days. This new album cuts back on the keyboards and is more guitar heavy. I don't mean AC/DC guitar heavy, mind you. It's just that it has, well, way more guitars up front in the mix. Songs like Tell Me How to Be Here and New Ages have those jangling, chiming, nearly psychedelic guitar sounds augmented by droning organs that recall the Velvet Underground and more specifically the Brian Jonestown Massacre. There's more lyrical bite to Neale's songs this time around as well, with All Good Things Come to Pass showing a surprising misanthropic streak as she ruminates on how humanity tends to lean toward negativity more often than not, ruining everything it touches politically, economically, and environmentally. It's pretty deep stuff and eruditely delivered for an artist usually known for singing about romantic longing. Overall, I give it 3.5 out of 5 stars, and it's an album that evokes considerable interest, at least for me, as to how Lael Neale will evolve on her or for her next album. Chris?
Yeah, my thing with her is good lyrics, interesting arrangements, as you said. I like the lyric on the album closer, "There from Here,"
Yeah,
which is like, we all are traveling to somewhere from somewhere we don't want to be to somewhere that might be better.
yeah.
So that's an interesting concept. She just needs to learn how to sing. I really don't like her voice. It's really, really high, shrilly, and it's like nails on a chalkboard falsetto. There's just something about that voice that does not work for me at all. and it's not even that it's overwrought. If anything, it's underwrought. And this is the kind of template, like you said, kind of backed by some jangle, backed by some, and a couple of the songs have electric drums. I mean, you would think that like a smokier voice, like you'd want a Fiona Apple type of voice working for it. Not there, hey, 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 up here, hey, hey. It just ruins the affair for me. So, it's an album that I would want to like because again, I mean, singer-songwriter fair these days. I mean, that's what I'm doing and for my edition here or for my pick. But it just I can't do it. It's a mental block. I think she just she can't sing. And I'm sorry to say it, but no, that's where I stand.
All right. So your pick, Chris.
Yeah, so my pick, it actually if Lael Neal's album is kind of a bum trip, well, here's a bummer trip, or maybe bummish trip. This is an album by a guy who goes by Perfume Genius, and it's called Glory, and it's actually really good acoustic folk and gay confessional pop, as I'll call it, folk rock. And so let's get into this a little bit. Uh, Perfume Genius is the nom de plume of Seattle singer-songwriter and astute folk rocker Mike Hadris. Hadris has been putting out albums as Perfume Genius for nearly 15 years now, regularly garnering acclaim from critics. And it's easy to see why. He mines a territory of acoustically anchored vulnerability and confession that writer boys always seem to dig. But in this case, the guy is actually good at it. Can't hate on the critics in this instance. Perfume Genius is out with his seventh album now, an 11-song set called Glory. It's filled with pretty songs about isolation, longing, and being stuck in moments that he just can't get out of. And he does it all while backed by a bunch of talented musicians, including his life partner, songwriter Alan Weifels, producer and occasional songwriter Blake Mills, and the terrific veteran drummer Jim Keltner, who Keltner's actually played with Neil Young. So there you go. While many of the songs remain quiet and ponderous, Hadrius does raise the volume on occasion on Glory, leading to surprisingly rousing moments. The highlights are mostly tucked in the front part of the album. Lead single and album opener It's a Mirror is all about a sense of alienation that Hadrius can't break. The song builds from a country lilter to a solid acoustic rocker by song's end. The next song, No Front Teeth, features New Zealand native and folk singer Aldous Harding on harmony vocals and also features a middle section that rocks more than anything else on Glory. Clean Heart launches with echoing percussion and reverby vocals from Hadris, which then segues into a lovely chime-driven chorus. It's actually the loveliest thing on the record, I think. And then there's the next two songs, tracks 4 and 5, Me and Angel and Left for Tomorrow, which give us a successive wallop of tuneful sadness. The former about wishing a former lover well in a new relationship, the latter about the pain of losing a close friend. The album closes, though, on a more hopeful note, with the lovely 2-minute title track, in which Hadrius describes his body being in quiet glory and finally finding shade. The close is a welcome grace note on what up until then is a melodically rendered bum trip. But alas, Hadrius has not given up on himself and hoping to find a way out of the darkness. And Glory is not perfect. The second half drags as Hadrius loses some of the previously established melodic force, but like a lot of albums in 2025 so far, it's a compelling, engaging, albeit flawed listen. I recommend it as mood music for a forlorn Sunday morning. So there, Arturo, what do you say?
I really tried hard to get into this. I gave it an honest shot with an open mind, but I couldn't get past the fifth or sixth. I couldn't get past track 6. It's just
Oh.
one continuously slow, whiny, mopey bedroom ballad bullshit song after another. And for you, it's Lyle Neal's voice that you can't get into. For me, it's this guy's lyrics. His lyrics are atrocious. They're just trite, sentimental cheesy and cringy, just overly wrought lyrics, but in the worst way possible. And simplistic too, simplistic in their romanticism. It just,
I mean, I think they're simple, not simplistic. I would say they
eh.
are simple lyrics. Simplistic would be even dopier. At least he's a little bit more opaque than that, you know?
Yeah, but even the opaque or the opacity of it is just like low common denominator, and it doesn't really take much to like really see. It's not really opaque; it's transparent if you can see through them. And I just think it's simple, yeah, too simple, and it's just the music itself is just too lovelorn, too like wow, wow, background music, lush crap that I normally can't stand. But I tried. I gave it a shot, so
Yeah,
they
and I'm saying he changes it up a little bit. It's not your standard mopey, purely acoustic fare. He mixes in some electric guitar, and he raises the volume here and there. And melodically, it's pretty strong. I mean, I said, I can
see.
understand. I mean, this is
I don't
exactly the
hear that.
kind of
I
route.
don't. I don't think they're catchy. If you're gonna do this kind of like this slow as molasses, romantic, whiny, mopey music, have some catchy melodies and hooks, and I don't hear them on this record.
Yeah, I think "It's a Mirror" is a strong single. It's one of the better singles I've heard this year. And so I think that that's kind of the standard. I think Clean Heart is another one that's really, really good. And again, I knew you weren't going to like this record because you usually don't like records like this.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, unless there's got to be some sort of quirk to it for you to like it. I mean, 'cause this is a very traditional, confessional folk rock pop record. You like your stuff with like quirks like all piano or if it's Nick Drakey or whatever. This sort of more straight take. I'm more of a fan of it than you are, and the same thing with Neale. I'm not much on wannabe falsetto singer girls. So there. So the equal the hate flows both ways. Usually this section is me modestly giving your selections a thumbs up and you shitting all over mine.
Now the
But
roles are reversed.
yeah,
No,
two
no, no,
ways.
not reversed. It's the same. It's just
It's a two-way shit. Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose, or maybe like a firehouse if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, help us expand our little community, and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock. Let's start talking about Hawkwind. This is one of the more singular bands in the history of rock and roll. For as much as I said, joked about drug use and the kind of the association with kind of trippy music and drug culture kind of music, these guys were seriously clever musicians and had a series of influences that you just didn't get in rock and roll up until 1971 when these guys came along. And so they deserve their props. We're calling it a sober defense. It's a double entendre. Yeah, sober in the sense that we both stayed sober while we were listening to these records, which, obviously triggered that nostalgia I talked about. But it's also sober in the sense of we're taking this band seriously and saying that as a space rock outfit, there was none better, there was none more important, and yes, that includes Pink Floyd. So, Arturo, let's get into our sober defense of Hawkwind. Give us 5 reasons why Hawkwind need defending.
number one, as you alluded to, More so than Pink Floyd, they were the preeminent space rock band. No doubt, Floyd could get spacey and trippy, especially in their early years in the psychedelic era of the 1960s. But after The Dark Side of the Moon, with Roger Waters taking on more of the songwriting responsibilities, they evolved into more of a progressive rock, even theatrical rock band. See The Wall. Hawkwind, on the other hand, maintained their love of science fiction derived lyrical narratives all throughout their career. They also never lost that cosmic psychedelic sheen to their sound, even when they went through so many stylistic changes and turns throughout the decades. New wave pop in the late 1970s, synth pop in the early to mid 1980s, electronic dance music, and even techno in the 1990s, and so on. Chris?
Yeah, people when they call Floyd space rock, it's more about the aesthetic of the music and about the stuff that Richard Wright and Nick Mason
Right.
added as far as keyboards and sound effects. But
Yeah.
they only really went to outer space once, as far as off the top of my head. Echoes
Right.
was real space rock. Other than that, it was all people going mad, and it was
Yeah.
all about how crazy life is here on Earth. Whereas Hawkwind, they were a sci-fi band to the nth, and not only
They
that,
rarely stayed on Earth.
yeah, no, yeah, they didn't have much use for Earth. And you also have to remember this is a band that, at least in its original iteration, had a full-time sound effects guy, like
Yeah.
basically that used analog electronics to make all kinds of weird, like vacuum sounding noises, and they had a full-time sax player and flautist. And
Yeah.
so, Floyd brought in would bring in session players, and Nick Mason would fuck around in addition to, in terms of sound effects in addition to drumming. But come on, Hawkwind had a full-time guy, a diddly diddly D guy,
Yeah.
and they had a full-time sax player from the very beginning. And then a little later in their iteration, they replaced the sax guy with a violinist slash mellotron player.
Yeah.
So they were space rock to the end, and also any band that has this lyric has got to be the space rock king of all time. This is from a Robert Calvert interlude from the live album Space Ritual called "The Awakening," and so Robert Calvert reads he says. I would rather the firestorms of atmospheres than this cruel descent from 1,000 years of dream into the starkness of the capsule where the two of our crew still lie suspended cool in their tombs of sleep, the nagging choirs of memory, the tubes and wires worming from their flesh to machinery I would have to cut. Such midwifery is but one function of the leader here, floating in a sack of fluid dark, a clear century of space away from Earth, while one man stirs from the trauma of his birth, attending to the hypnotapes, assuring him that this is reality, however grim, our journey's end. Landing itself was nothing. We touched upon a shelf of rock, selected by the auto mind, and left a galaxy of dreams behind.
Now, can you imagine listening
Whoa.
to that stoned?
Yeah. Whoa. Hey, it would actually make more sense. And so yes, they actually had a space opera show that they did that was centered around the concept of a couple of space travelers re-entering Earth in suspended animation, traveling through space, time and space at the time, being frightened as they did. So yeah, that was the about as stonery a concept as absolutely imaginable. Whoa, man, could you imagine if we were in suspended animation? Wow.
Yeah, good one. Number two, why they should be defended. They were, in their own way, quite proto-punk. John Lydon of Sex Pistols and Public Image Limited fame once famously said that the riff to the 1972 Hawkwind song Brainstorm was a big launching pad for punk rock that would emerge a few years later, and a big launching pad for his own band. And if you listen to the 1972 through 75 period of Hawkwind, when future Motorhead main man Lemmy Kilmister played bass for them, you'll see that he's right. I mentioned in the beginning of this episode that Lemmy once described Hawkwind, at least when he was in the band, as, quote, Pink Floyd with balls. And indeed, The band's version of the Hawkwind's version of psychedelic and cosmic space rock was imbued with a riff-laden aggression and a heaviness that was matched only by the heavy metal bands of the time, i.e. Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and Deep Purple. Their relationship to punk was even more explicit in their DIY approach to touring. They funded the tours themselves, they booked their own shows, their fan base grew via word of mouth, they played free festivals, and also in their own intense anti-establishment attitude. Chris?
Yeah, not much more to add to that other than to say that Dave Brock was a champion slicer and dicer on the rhythm guitar.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, their first couple albums, they're almost as gnarly as those first few Stooges records.
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of just that pure sweatiness that's
Yeah.
going on there's an ethos, there's a work ethic that's going
Right.
on there. That's a hard working band. You can hear them sweating through the speakers, and they made a hell of a noise and they bashed the fuck out. So yeah,
Mm.
they were definitely proto punk, and it doesn't surprise me to hear that John Lydon says that Brainstorm was kind of an influence on the punks because that is just a riff on Alone from High. One that Dave Brock, neither Brock or Lemmy Kilmister actually wrote. We'll get to that
Mm.
in a bit.
Oh. Number three, why they should be defended. They had a lot in common with krautrock at the time, meaning the 1970s. Throughout most of their career, but especially in their 1970s peak, their spacey cosmic grooves had much in common with the trancy, hypnotic, repetitive but not monotonous grooves of the German progressive rock of the time, known as krautrock. Go listen to Neu! And Can, and you can easily see how Hawkwind had an obvious kinship with those bands. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of Germanness in it. It's probably not an accident that if you listen to their first record, or the first record that we're going to cover here, In Search of Space, and say to yourself, they sound kind of like Amon Düül too. That's because Amon Düül's bassist actually plays bass on that record. So yeah, they had kinship with the Amon Dual tools and the cans and the sort of both pre-Motorique and post-Motorique. A
Right.
little bit later on, their mid period records, mid '70s period records, got actually a little bit more Motorique and a little bit
Mhm.
more electronic. When Simon
Right.
House, the keyboardist, joined the band,
Right.
and so they almost, certainly Neu! And even I mean, the stuff is a little bit before Trans Europe Express, but even the kind of stuff that Kraftwerk was doing
Right.
before Trans Europe Express, so a lot more electronic, and
Right.
yeah, so on either side of the Motorique beat, which is that train to chick 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 that the Germans came up with, Lemmy and Dave Brock and company are definitely German influenced.
Reason number four why they should be defended. Not only were they the seminal stoner rock band of their time, they were deeply influential on what would become stoner rock slash stoner metal years later. With all the nouns and adjectives we've used to describe Hawkwind's music so far, it's pretty obvious that this is a band whose music you want to get stoned and zoned out to in your bedroom. Guess what? A whole bunch of young people who would go on to form bands in the 1980s and 90s in what became formerly known as stoner rock or stoner metal were listening to Hawkwind in very much the same way.
Yep.
They weren't just listening to Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. Heavy riffs and heavy rhythms mixed with swirling psychedelic textures. Thy name is Hawkwind, and thy children are as follows. Josh Homme and any of his bands, particularly Caius and Queens of the Stone Age, Fu Manchu, Monster Magnet, Soundgarden, Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, the OCs, Ty Segall, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, especially them. Stu
Yeah.
McKenzie seriously may as well be Dave Brock's grandson.
Yeah, no shit.
Wand, Slift. That's just to name a few.
Yeah,
Chris.
that's a pretty good roll call. I was going to say without Hawkwind, there would be no Caius.
Yeah.
There's a direct lineal line of descent,
Yeah.
as opposed to non-lineal lines. I know lineal. There's a line. Yeah, there's a line of descent that goes straight from Hawkwind to Caius. without
It's a straight line that goes from Hawkwind to King Gizzard. Good God.
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, just again, it's that heaviness mixed with the sound effects,
Yeah.
and it became keyboards, but it started out as like as I don't even know what the equipment they were using was, but where you get all that sort of spaceship kind of wow 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 wow
Yeah.
wow wow
Yeah.
wow wow, and not
Right.
only that, but Hawkwind had a patented hawk wind that went through
Yeah.
a lot of their songs. Like seriously, like Silver Machine
Mm.
and Brainstorm and songs like that. There is a wind that goes through those records
Yeah.
that is very discernible and adds to the awesomeness and the heaviness of those
Right.
records. And so that kind of adds to that. That's another stoner influence too,
Yeah.
is that it's heavy, but it's somehow it's airy too.
Yeah. Yeah. They really struck that balance. Reason
Yeah.
number five why they should be defended. There really was no other band like them when they were at their peak. In the 1960s, to be psychedelic meant to be all mystic and mellow at best, twee and wussy at worst. However, in the early 1970s, by incorporating heavy doses of hard rock guitar riffage and heavy stomping repetitive rhythms into their psychedelic stew, they put menace and weight into cosmic space rock, taking it away from lightweight, middle of the road musicians and highbrow art school snobs and bringing it to quote unquote the people
The
and
people.
average
Yeah.
music fans who are unaware of an alternative to what the rock music of the day was. And remember, their sci-fi story lyrics, often provided later on in the 1970s by singer, lyricist, freaky frontman Robert Calvert, were worlds apart from the standard lyrical fare of the day. Keep in mind, this was well before Rush came onto the scene and became prominent.
Yeah.
Chris?
Well before Rush. Now, you could say that Sabbath was something of a peer, Black Sabbath, but
Yeah.
Sabbath's lane was much narrower.
Yeah.
They had that kind of sludgy metal
Yeah.
thing going on, but they didn't mess with the tempos as much as Hawkwind did. They didn't mess with the sound effects as much as Hawkwind did, and they weren't whereas yeah, obviously Black Sabbath has Sweet Leaf, and
Yeah.
so there is a stoner rockness to them, but they're not as dedicated to it, and they're not as balls to the wall, and they don't have the Germanic influence. Again, that's what's really it. So there really is nobody like Hawkwind at this point. That they were acid heads doing acid rock their way, and they were doing it in that heavy ass style. And I kind of like how you said it. They were like men of the people,
Yeah.
and it was not it wasn't highbrow in the least. It was like pretty much straight out of like the sci-fi serials of the 1950s.
Yeah.
Was like little green men and kind of shit like that.
Well, I mean, that was when Dave Brock was a teenager growing up. I'm sure he was really into that shit when he was a kid.
Yep, and it definitely translates into their music. So yep, nobody else like them at all. So good list of five defenses there, Art. Now let's talk about the band's origin story. How did Hawkwind form, and how did they get into the albums we're going to discuss?
Yeah, a brief origin story. The story of Hawkwind begins with singer-guitarist Dave Brock, who bounced around the 1960s London music scene for years before settling on a small-time psychedelic band called Famous Cure. Yet, in 1969, it was while briefly being in this band that Brock started to form the original incarnation of what would eventually become Hawkwind. He left Famous Cure, took the band's lead guitarist Mick Slattery with him, and got together with bassist John Harrison, the three of them bonding over a shared love of electronic music. Drummer Terry Ollis replied to an advertisement in a weekly newspaper to join the band, and a couple of old friends of Brock, Nick Turner and Michael Davies, Mick Dick, as you would eventually he would eventually be known as,
Dick
joined the
Mick.
band as saxophonist and keyboardist slash general electronics guy, respectively. The band chose to gate crash a local talent show at a club in the Notting Hill area of London, having played only a few gigs together, and they didn't even have a name yet. They settled on the rather generic name Group X and played a 20-minute version of the Byrds' 8 Miles High. In one of the in one
I'm
of the
sorry.
most
That's funny.
yeah, that's
Okay.
yeah, very fitting. In one of the most fortuitous strokes of luck in music history, the BBC's famous radio DJ John Peel happened to be in the audience. He told the event organizer, a guy named Douglas Smith, that he really liked them, which led to Smith hooking them up with a record deal with US based Liberty Records, who had UK and European distribution via Decca Records. They eventually settled on the name Hawkwind after shortening it from Hawkwind Zoo. They recorded demos at Abbey Road Studios and made honest attempts at recording a proper album at a couple of other studios, but were unhappy with the results. Deciding to record live in the studio, in London's Trident studio in this case, in order to capture as much of the band's raw sound as possible, Hawkwind recruited Dick Taylor, the former guitarist of the Pretty Things, to produce the record. While their self-titled debut is notable because it's Hawkwind's first of many, many albums in their dense discography, it doesn't really sound like the heavy-duty cosmic space rock they became known for. Released in the spring of 1970, it's mostly a set of weird, trippy, sound effects-laden psychedelic folk or acid folk. The single, Hurry on Sundown, with its jaunty vibe and rather conventional arrangement, is probably the song that best represents the album in this period of Hawkwind. However, as a live band, Hawkwind quickly changed and evolved to the delight of the growing throng of hippies, hipsters, and drug using freaks who were attending their shows due to word of mouth acclaim. They played numerous free gigs, benefit concerts, and festivals throughout 1970, including a free show outside the grounds of the Bath Festival and an incendiary performance at the Isle of Wight Festival, also in 1970. By now, they were no mere quaint British psych rock band. Yes, still trippy and cosmic, but the guitars were louder and dirtier than usual, with weird electronic sound effects and multicolored lights enveloping the crowd and the band themselves in psychedelic face paint. Yes. By this point, they had become known exclusively for their captivating live shows, which were quickly becoming freak out, bring your own drugs events. But before we get into the album where Hawkwind really became Hawkwind, what say you, Chris, about this fascinating band's origins?
Yeah, you make an important point in your description there that this band was not a creation of the studio,
Yeah.
and they weren't a creation of rehearsal. It was the live shows where they had the freedom to explore and the jams and to get louder and to get freakier and to get weirder and to play with that crowd and to make it an experience. You said, with the lights and with the face paint and with the with their affinity for sci-fi, and so becoming an experience made it that much more of a thing. And I don't think that if this band wasn't as dogged as they were on the road and in the clubs in and around London and in and around the UK, they wouldn't have become what they did. They would have probably stayed in that lane that they were in their first record, where they were just kind of deedly, they were just twisting some knobs and,
Yeah.
and cranking out some more conventional stuff. I mean, they didn't. If they had just stayed there and took their shows for granted, they never would have grown. But they really took to the stage as being somewhat of a laboratory. And by the way, you gotta love any band that has band member named Dick Mick. I mean, the guy's name was Michael Davies, but he went by Dick Mick, and he's the sound effects guy. He's the guy playing with the, like you said, General Electronics guy.
Yeah. Basically,
He
the oscillator that Silver Apples used in the late
yeah.
60s, he was using a version of that.
Yeah, he's using an oscillator, or he's using some sort of like, those wah, 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 wah,
Yeah.
wah, wah, and can do
Yeah.
that. And not only that, but he could make wind, and he could make vacuum cleaner sounds, and he could make whistles, and it was really, really freaky. They didn't really, in their first couple of albums, at least during this origin period, they didn't have keyboards or synths per se. They had
Yeah.
synths here and there, but it
Yeah.
was basically just them bashing out on guitars with the sound effects swirling around them, adding and augmenting and getting
Right.
really, really weird. They were a
Right.
weird band, but they were a delectably weird band. Gotta love them.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, now let's get into this album streak. Their second album, but their first in their classic album streak of the 1970s, In Search of Space from 1971. By this time, Hawkwind had already gone through several lineup changes. Many, and I mean many
Manny.
more, would
Yeah.
occur throughout the band's lifetime. This would make the band essentially a revolving door lineup with singer-guitarist Dave Brock as the sole constant member, which is fitting since he was, and still is, the band's main creative force, principal songwriter, and direction giver. This means I will not go too much into detail regarding the many, many musicians and even non-musicians who came in and out of Hawkwind, except for two notable people, beginning with the next album. That being said, In Search of Space is where Brock and company made a great leap forward into being the band the world would know them to be. Master of the universe with its powerhouse riff, spacey sound effects, and pounding, driving drum attack, may be the first definitive Hawkwind song. 15-minute album opener, You Shouldn't Do That, is a spiraling jam with swirling, alternating keyboard and saxophone solos and goes so far into the cosmos' outer reaches of spaciness with its jamming that it sounds like a very close cousin of the krautrock band Faust. You Know You're Only Dreaming begins as discombobulated psychedelic soup before everything comes together in a mid-tempo, jazzy jam, not unlike Sun Ra. Overall, it's blissed out yet it's a blissed out yet heavy as fuck record that really serves as the perfect entry into Hawkwind's discography. Chris?
Yeah, it's something. I kind of refer to this album as space jazz.
Yeah.
There's almost a jazzy quality to it. You know, when you start your album with a 15-minute, 42-second driven freak out,
Yeah.
we talking about we shouldn't do that, where it's basically built on sax soloing and those weird electronic effects, and it's
Right.
not really a song. It's more of it's more of a jam.
Yeah.
And then you have that, and then you have the song "We Took the Wrong Steps Years Ago," which has got a real hippie jazz vibe to it. It's acoustic guitar, echoing flutes, and almost kind of like almost like hippie bebop,
Yeah.
in a sense. And then the song "Adjust Me," and then you already used the term psychedelic soup. I have it in my notes. "Adjust Me" is perfect psychedelic metal soup with weird
Yeah.
vocal effects, and the vocal effects where it's slowed down and then it's sped up, and it does all of that. And so you got that, like we already said, Dave Anderson plays bass on this, so it has that kinship with the Germans right
Yeah.
there, and it has direct, kind of direct tie-in to early krautrock there. And worth noting, by the way, and I'll make mention of this several times as we go through these records. In the mid 90s, I think 1996, they reissued a lot of their albums on CD.
Mm. Mm.
And in doing the reissues, they came with bonus tracks, and
Right.
one of the bonus tracks, and you may talk about this here shortly, or
Yeah.
but one of the bonus tracks is their biggest hit, "Silver Machine."
Which would come out the next year, not in 1971,
Yeah, but
which is
but but
weird.
but it was tacked on here, and it's a live version of it. It was actually, the lyrics are by at this point, occasional collaborator Robert Calvert, but the song is
Yeah.
sung by Lemmy Kilmister,
Yeah.
who would join the band after this record was done.
Right.
And but it was their biggest hit, and it's a cool ass song, but it's got that hawk wind
Yeah.
going through it, and so there you go. And the other thing worth noting about this record too is that whereas Dave Brock was kind of the spiritual leader and the one constant at this juncture of the band's history, the saxophone and flautist player was a guy named Nick Turner.
Yeah.
He was just as important in terms of the writing and the creative output. He has 3 writing credits on this record, including "You Shouldn't Do That."
Right.
And so that's his writing on there. So he had some chops, and he
Yeah.
said most of the time he stuck to the sax,
Yeah.
but he could step up and do a lead turn when it came time to. So
Yeah.
yeah, good
Yeah.
record.
Next, Do Re Mi Fa Sol Latido from 1972. And here comes Lemmy. Lemmy Kilmister's first album as Hawkwind's bassist gives the band the kick in the ass that sent them into the heavens and as truly one of the best bands of their era. Everything on this album is deeper, heavier, louder, more rocking, and yet somehow even spacier, more psychedelic, and more cosmic than In Search of Space. My clear-cut choice for Hawkwind's best studio album. This is the album that features the almighty Brainstorm, a song that, I said earlier, John Lydon of the Sex Pistols and Public Image Limited once famously quoted as saying, practically launched 1,000 punk bands a few years later on the strength of its dirty brontosaurus riff. Space is Deep starts as a folky reverie with loopy sound effects on the synthesizer before it launches at the 330 or the 320 mark into a blissful cosmic rock elegy. Lord of Light brings more of the trance drum rhythms and heavy as fuck guitar riffage, but with Lemmy's bass in the mix, there's added heaviness and extra strut as Lemmy plays his bass like a second guitar rather than a standard bass. Time We Left This World Today is an epic, romping jam that solidifies Hawkwind's stoner rock credentials. You mentioned the song Silver Machine, Chris. That's actually an outtake from this record. And it's a scintillating standalone single sung by Lemmy that became the band's only top 10, the only hit in their only top 10 hit in the UK. Overall, a thoroughly sublime album. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. Just awesome stuff. And Brainstorm, right up there at the front. That's one of the greatest heavy metal jams of all time. And it
Yeah.
was written by Nick Turner. It's for as much of a star turn as both Dave Brock on guitar and Lemmy Kilmister on bass, especially Lemmy give on Brainstorm. It was written by Nick Turner, so that's the creative output of him. Whereas Brock's main triumphs here are the songs "Lord of Light" and "Time We Left This World Today," which both evoke Sabbath. They have a little bit of that proto metal riff-tastic magic, but they're also groovy and noisy as hell. And part of that again is Lemmy, but also that Hawkwind shows
Yeah.
up, especially in "Time We Left This World Today."
Yeah.
Shows up there, and Brock even kind of sounds like Ozzy on there. So I do think that while they were a little bit, they were more adventurous ultimately than Black Sabbath. I think you
Yeah.
can call Sabbath a cousin band because they
Yeah.
were kind of mining in the same riffage. And remember,
Yeah.
Master of Reality came out that same year,
That's
and
those are two bands that should have toured together.
yeah, could you imagine? Yeah,
That show.
I don't think my brain could have like literally survived that. Like organically, I don't think my brain could have survived that show.
Yeah.
For sure. And again, so one thing you could say about these first few Hawkwind records is that the production sucks. It's thin and it's tinny, but who gives a fuck? When
Music
things
is
are
so awesome. Yeah.
the things are blasting like this and they're making this kind of noise it's the noise and the fury and just the purpose and the propulsion that
Yeah.
they're working with. Who gives a fuck? That's like last episode we covered Husker Du that did a bunch of thin tinny production but made several awesome albums. So there you go. So sometimes you're willing to forgive the engineering gods
Yeah.
and just kind of give it up for them. And then you also mentioned you mentioned that a couple other things. You mentioned Lemmy as a bass player. Funny story, and I actually get it. This is from the Wikipedia entry on Hawkwind that Lemmy became the bassist by accident. That he actually was a guitarist in the scene, and by his own admission, not a very good guitarist, and he made up for it by stage antics.
Yeah.
But he showed up apparently Brock was in bad need of a second guitarist, and so he recruits Lemmy from the scene. Lemmy shows up. Well, it turns out the bassist that they had hired after Dave Anderson, he also was just fired or didn't show up. So it's like, hey, can you play bass? It's like, sure. And so he learned to play bass on the fly, literally.
Yeah.
And so this is why he's such kind of a unique bass player, where he plays bass like a guitar. He
Yeah.
plays it's more of a propeller than anyone who really stayed in the pocket.
Yeah.
One thing to note here that he actually contributes his first song
Mm.
to the band, the song "The Watcher," which
Yeah.
here is kind of slowed and stretched. Now, metal fans among you might actually understand that "The Watcher" was a song was track 6 on Motorhead's 1977 debut record, and there it's faster, harder, punkier, and
Yeah.
obviously more Motorhead.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it actually got its start here. And then one other thing to mention. I guess two other things to mention. One of the bonus tracks on the CD reissue here is "Urban Gorilla," which would
Yes.
have been a hit single if it had been more well timed because it
Even though
came out.
it came out the next year, 1973.
Yeah, here's the thing: when it hit the airwaves, and it's an awesome garagey single, and it's a collaboration with Robert Calvert and
Right.
Dave Brock. But when it came out, it was right in the middle of when the Irish Republican Army was doing a
Right.
bombing campaign in London. And here's
Yeah.
a song. It's called "Urban Gorilla" and has a lyric quote: "Watch out, Mr. Businessman, your empire is about to blow." Well, needless to say, that didn't go over too well with the radio overlords, and it got quickly pulled from the air. Otherwise, it could have been a huge hit. It could have been a hit on a par with Silver Machine, but alas, there you go. It cut a little too close to Urban Gorilla. And one final thing, if in case you're wondering about that album title, remember the musical scale: do, re,
Yeah.
mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Yeah. That's what they named it for.
Yep, there you
They
go.
couldn't think of a better name. They had all this creativity for their sci-fi stories, but not for album titles, I guess.
Nope.
All right, next. Live album, Space Ritual from 1973. This live album, culled from two December 1972 shows in Brixton and Liverpool, is Hawkwind's biggest selling and most popular album. And just one listen to this sprawling double LP set shows why.
Yep.
For as great as the previous two studio albums were, live is where this band truly shined. The tempos are faster, the riffs are crunchier, the drums sound louder, and overall, there's an intensity to these performances that Hawkwind, no matter how good their studio albums could be, could never really match in the studio. Unfortunately, this live album doesn't give one an idea of the visual element to the Hawkwind stage show. Swirling multicolored lights, strobe lights flashing, Robert Calvert, a spoken word artist who had become the group's de facto lead singer and main lyricist at this time, interspersing drug-inspired cosmic philosophy in between songs, as you quoted earlier, Chris. From here on out, Hawkwind would essentially become the British answer to the Grateful Dead, a band more known for their epic live shows and hardcore cult following that traveled around with them than what they put on record. In my opinion, this live album should be on anyone's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. Chris?
Agreed. This is an essential live album. Now, normally, folks that have been with us for a long time, and we've been around for more than 4 years, so that's a long time. When we do these artist retrospective episodes, we tend to skip the live albums and the compilations, and we stick to the studio records. But here we have to include this live record because it's far out, yo. So that's one thing, but it's really an event record, and it's more than a standard play the hits live album. Again, and this band put on a show, and it must have been something to experience live. Like we said, the visual element. One thing that you forgot to mention was they had the interpreted dancer who
Oh,
was
yeah, Stacia.
who was naked and body painted.
Yeah, she was naked. Well, she was wearing bottoms. She was wearing like panties. But other than that, she was naked and she was in blue body paint. And she
Yep.
would do her name was Stacia, and she would do interpretive dancing. And she was
Yep.
around about as long as Lemmy was in the band too.
Yeah.
So
And the thing about their live shows is that at least the space ritual show that they did, it was all connected. It was almost like a space opera, and it was built around this wild concept, which we kind of talked about earlier, where about a couple of star travelers that are coming back to Earth, but they're in suspended animation while crossing the space-time continuum while they're descending to Earth. So it's this terrifying experience that they're putting together in life in this really heavy, tripped out, psychedelic affair. And they connect all the songs with these spoken word pieces by Calvert and also by Michael Moorcock or Moorcock.
more the unfortunately named Michael
Michael
Moorcock.
Moorcock. Moorcock, please. Uh,
Poor
but
guy.
yeah, sorry about that, Michael Moorcock. But with the spoken word interludes, but also instrumental interludes, just kind of like weird, trippy noise effects, and with Dick Mick was still involved, and they had another guy, I believe his name was Delmar, who was involved in doing sound effects as well. And so you had some interludes. So it's all connected. And so the album itself, at least in its original release, is like an hour and 40 minutes long. And then when they did the re-release, it goes up to 2 hours, 15 minutes. But they keep it going. It's also worth mentioning a couple of things. There's a couple of tracks from the previous record from Do Re Mi
Yeah.
that got the acoustic treatment on that record. Here
Mm.
are completely just rock the fuck out. There's an electric
Yeah.
version of Down Through the Night, and the
Yeah.
version of Space is Deep is also
Yeah.
rocked out too.
Yeah.
And then this also has one of my favorite Hawkwind songs of all time on it, and it was a B-side called Oregon Accumulator,
Oh, it's a great song.
which
Yeah.
is Hawkwind doing blues rock,
Yeah.
which was rare. And this is another Calvert Brock collaboration, and just great song. And it's almost worth getting it just for that. And then also, obviously, the version of Brainstorm on here goes 13 and a half minutes and is just a mind melter. Just
Yeah.
awesome stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, not your conventional live record. And definitely, if I'm advising anybody listening to this record that's never heard Hawkwind and you want to dive in, start with Space Ritual. On our playlist, I'll probably put Space Ritual first, and I'll put it
Yeah.
right up front, all 2 hours of it, so you can get into that. That should be your gateway into Hawkwind,
Yeah.
right, Art?
Yep. All right. Next, Hall of the Mountain Grill from 1974. Hawkwind took the heaviness that they showed on the Space Ritual live album, as well as Do Re Mi Fa Sol Latido, as far as they could. So for this album, they started to venture into different sounds and styles to augment their epic psychedelic space rock. Opening track, Psychedelic Warlords, comes very close to approximating the kind of funk rock hybrid that Funkadelic were known for at the time. D Rider has some truly mind melting synth washes and phased, distorted vocals, while Webweaver starts as a stately acoustic guitar and piano piece before launching into a full blown psych jam. You'd better believe it, the album single rocks with a sinister purpose, incorporating mellotron washes and electric violin solos. Hell, even Lemmy gets another one of his own songs on this record with the chugging rocker Lost Johnny. A very good entry in Hawkwind's glorious 1970s catalog that keeps things going. Chris?
Yeah, in some ways you could call this album their peak because this is where they figured out how to produce a record. And so it sounds a lot better and it's a lot fuller and it's not just loud. It's also got some bottom to it and cleaner arrangements. And an important inflection point here with Hall of the Mountain Grill. Out goes Dick Mick, in comes Simon House. Now, Del Detmar, that's the other guy. He's still there. He's the other sound effects guy. He's still
Right.
there. And so there's still a little bit of that weirdness, but you've really replaced a lot of that electronic and a lot of that oscillator shit with actual keyboards. And House could also play violin, and he's much more of a serious musician. He brings more of a classical influence and an electronica, like European electronic type influence to the band. He actually wrote the title track, which is the spooky yet lovely space opera instrumental at the heart of the record. You mentioned Lemmy's song "Lost Johnny." That's another song that showed up on Motorhead's first record.
Yeah.
Apparently, Lemmy wasn't all that prolific, and so so those songs are from '73 and or '72 and '74, and they are two of the first seven songs he released as part of Motorhead, starting in 1977. So not the most prolific guy. Uh, Blame the amphetamines, I guess. But so again, you can maybe call it their peak. I don't think it's as good as Do Re Mi, but it's definitely there. And honestly, I think Psychedelic Warlords, that's my favorite. That's probably my favorite Hawkwind song. That song is just awesome.
Yeah.
That riff on there, that bow 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 down bow 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 bow
Yeah.
bow.
Yeah.
It just bops.
Yeah.
So really really good stuff. But again, the important thing to know about this record is in comes Simon House, and things start getting a little bit more electronic and a little bit weirder, but more conventional. They start to get a little bit more conventional starting from this point on.
All right, next, Warrior on the Edge of Time from 1975. As you mentioned, Chris, science fiction writer Michael Moorcock provided the majority of the lyrics on this album, loosely based on his novel The Eternal Champion. Musically, Dave Brock steers Hawkwind into more atmospheric soundscapes and less guitar riffage while maintaining their patented rhythmic thrust. The album's opening pair of tracks, Assault and Battery Part 1 and The Golden Void Part 2, attest to this. Elsewhere, you have the very trippy hypnotic rhythm track Opalaka and the beguiling track Magnu, which incorporates Middle Eastern melodies and tones and synthesizers that emulate traditional Arabic instrumentation. The single, Kings of Speed, ends the album on an oddly rocking note for an album that doesn't really rock that hard, but it's fitting when you take into account that this is Lemmy's last album with the band, as he was kicked out due to his drug habits, mainly amphetamines, cocaine, and booze, not being aligned with the band's usual preference for marijuana and psychedelics.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
gonna say you're on the wrong drugs, dude.
some hardcore Hawkwind fans will tell you this is the last truly great Hawkwind album, while I think there's still some greatness ahead. Chris?
Yeah, I still think there's some greatness ahead too. Yeah, this record again, Simon House grows his importance in on this record, and you get more of the keyboard kind of stuff going on, and Magnu is awesome. I mean, that's
Yeah.
Dave Brock's major contribution to the record. I mean, it's the most riff-tastic thing on it. But ultimately, the star is Michael Moorcock, and some of the lyrics. Here's another, and I'm doing this on purpose because I'm making the point that this was the true space rock
Yeah.
champion.
Yeah.
So these lyrics are gourmet science fiction shit.
Yeah.
And so there's a spoken word interlude piece on there called Warriors, which is basically the title track. And so here is Michael Moorcock, the science fiction, the fantasy novelist slash graphic novelist slash poet. And here's what he writes. He says, quote, "We are the warriors at the edge of time. We are humanity's scythe to sweep this way and that and cut the enemy down as weeds. We are humanity's spade to dig up the roots wherever they have grown. We are humanity's fire to burn the waste to the finest ash. We are the wind which will blow the ash away as if it had never existed. We will destroy those enemies, but we must first know the enemies, and the enemies are the devils that hide in our minds and make us less than happy. They make us less than happy. We are the warriors at the edge of time. We are the veterans of a savage truth. We are the lost. We are the last. We are the betrayed. We are the betrayed. We are betrayed."
It sounds like a tripped out wrestling promo.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah, Damien Demento from the outer reaches of your mind, baby. But yeah. So the enemies are the devils that hide in our minds. Oh, now that's a far out concept, yo. Can't beat that.
On this episode, we defended the greatness of the legendary psychedelic rock band Hawkwind. For the next episode, we're taking the opposite tack and going back to our shit series, where we examine the work of a band we really cannot stand. For this next installment, the Curmudgeons will take aim at quite possibly the worst band to come out of the 1990s rap metal slash nu metal scene, Limp Bizkit. The fact that they were the most commercially successful and popular band of this mostly crappy subgenre is what's most maddening to us, and it quite possibly represents the nadir of what popular mainstream tastes in hard rock or heavy metal music was at the time. And that's saying something. Join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you Why Limp Bizkit Are Shit. Next, Astounding Sounds, Amazing Music. Yes, that's the name of the album from 1976. This is the classic transition record. Hawkwind had changed managers, changed record labels, going from United Artists to Charisma. Bassist Lemmy Kilmister had left, and Dave Brock had by now relinquished the role of chief songwriter-composer, allowing a more democratic process with all band members, even the newest ones, contributing songs or parts of songs. Robert Calvert even returned to be the main lyricist and permanent vocalist. The results, as you would expect when the group's principal member and visionary concedes their songwriting authority, are pretty underwhelming, at least for me. Consider this Hawkwind light, with every aspect of their patented sound toned down, watered down, and streamlined for mainstream radio consumption. Way too clean, way too professional, way too slick. Fortunately, the single, Curb Crawler, is the only track I think that maintains that old Hawkwind spirit. Chris?
Yeah, I would expand that and say that Brock has got three main rockers on this record: Reefer
Yeah.
Madness, Steppenwolf, and Curb Crawler. That
Yeah.
the Astounding Sounds, Amazing Music, as some of you may we've already talked about a little bit about the influence of the sci-fi serials. That this album was kind of intended as an ode to the
Yeah.
sci-fi serials. Like each song has its own narrative and its own kind of freaky deakiness. And so, Reefer Madness is a goof on the Reefer Madness thing from the 30s, and it's just sort of a goof on how pot is a scary thing. And Steppenwolf is a werewolf, is a werewolf saga. And then Curb Crawler,
Not the band doing Born to Be Wild.
no. It's Steppenwolf, as in the novel Steppenwolf. And then Curb Crawler, oddly enough, is just an ode to a car, an ode to a slick set of wheels. And here's the thing: this album, otherwise, with Simon House and Alan Powell and some of the other members getting writing credits on here. The rest of the album kind of borders on more of a Floyd record. Now, granted, it's as good, if not better, than most of what Floyd did in the 70s themselves. But they're also finding a kinship with Floyd at this point because, strange but true, did you know that the album version of Curb Crawler was remixed by none other than David Gilmour?
Ah,
Yeah.
wow.
Yep. So
So
David
there was some
Gilmour.
collaboration there between Floyd and Hawkwind.
Yeah, so he mixed Curb Crawler. Didn't play on it. That would have been really interesting.
Yeah.
David Gilmour playing on a Hawkwind song, but he remixed it, so it has that. If it sounds clean and professional, it's because they actually had the cleanest, most professional guy in Britain,
Yeah.
as their remix guy.
The only
So
thing more fascinating would have been able to get Lemmy and Roger Waters in the same room together and not kill each other.
yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I could just imagine those two coexisting. Not,
Not.
don't think that would happen. But again, so the good stuff is great, and the other stuff is so. Simon House could write, so he was always good for an electronic keyboard space odyssey or two on every album that he was involved in. So good stuff.
Next, Quark, Strangeness and Charm from 1977. Dave Brock once more went with the inclusive approach to Hawkwind's music and allowing all band members to contribute. But this time, the band did not disappoint. Robert Calvert's sci-fi lyrics and cosmic ramblings display a quirkier, more demented sense of humor this time out.
Yep.
Something Hawkwind's music sorely needed at this time. Musically, it's clear Brock is starting to embrace the economy and conciseness of the burgeoning new wave sound in rock, if not outright punk, with more of an emphasis on keyboards and cutting down on, but not completely eliminating, the spacey sound effects and long psychedelic passages in the music. With songs like Spirit of the Age, Damnation Alley, and Days of the Underground, you even get catchy hooks, discernible melodies, and weird vocal phrasings from Calvert. Hassan-e Sabah even brings back the Middle Eastern melodies and tones that were flirted with a couple of albums before. Overall, it's a return to form while also introducing a welcome modification to the traditional Hawkwind sound. Chris?
Yep. This is still space rock, but it's a different brand of space rock. It's more keyboard driven. It's more electronic background. And you also have one thing to know about this record. This Nick Turner had left the band
Right.
before. He had been on all the albums until then, and he was their saxophone flutist and occasional co-writer. By this point, he's out of the band, and so you lose the sax and the flutes, and you get more of the violins and more of the mellotron and more of the stuff from Simon House, and so he's more dominant. And Detmar is gone at this point too, so they're much more of a traditionally instrumented, and they're essentially an early quasi new wave band by this point, but it's still space rock and it's still sci-fi. And the lyrics are actually the champion on this record. And as I've been doing, I need to share some more lyrics because they're friggin' great. From Robert Calvert on "Spirit of the Age" and verse 2. I am a clone. I am not alone. Every fiber of my flesh and bone is identical to the others. Everything I say is in the same tone. As my test tube brother's voice, there is no choice between us. If you ever had seen us, you'd rejoice in your uniqueness and consider every weakness something special of your own. Being a clone, I have no flaws to identify. Even this doggerel that pours from my pen has just been written by another 20 telepathic men. Oh, word for word it says, oh, for the wings of any bird other than a battery hen. Yeah! Woo!
Damn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
And
mean, if you read about Calvert's life, he also, he suffered from serious mental health issues.
yeah, he had
He
serious
was a
depression.
he was a diagnosed schizophrenic and shit. Like
Yeah.
he had some serious problems. So,
Yeah, but it made him a good writer, and then probably the most clever lyric that ever came out of Hawkwind by anybody was from Quark's Strangeness and Charm,
mm.
where he writes, Einstein was not a handsome fellow. No one ever called him Al. He had a long mustache to pull on. It was yellow. I don't believe he ever had a girl. One thing he missed out in his theory of time and space and relativity is something that makes it very clear he was never going to score like you and me. He didn't know about Quark's strangeness and charm. Yeah. So
Nice.
basically, a put down of Einstein being a nerd who couldn't get laid, which probably was true. Yeah. He had all his energy to come up with E equals MC squared as
Yeah.
opposed to E equals my pants. Um, so
The brief porn version. E
yeah,
equals my pants.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so no, a good record. I like this record a lot, and
Yeah.
this is their last great record.
Yeah. I think
I
there's
think
one more great one coming.
it's more consistent than it's Astounding Sounds, amazing music, and yeah, okay. So
We'll get to it. We'll get to it. All
we'll
right.
get to it. So
Okay, good.
so things get weird here in these last couple records as the band is as the classic iteration is falling apart, right?
Yeah, right. The next album, 28 years on from
25 years
1978.
on.
Sorry, 28. 25 years on from 1978. Another year, another massive turnover in Hawkwind's lineup, massive arguments and disagreements during the band's US tour in early 78 led to an utter dissolution of the band, leaving Dave Brock, singer, poet, weirdo, frontman Robert Calvert, and drummer Simon King as really the only members of the band left standing, entering the studio to record this album. In addition, because of a dispute over the name Hawkwind at the time, they had to release the record under the name Hawklords. As you might expect, the turmoil surrounding Brock at the time led to him composing all the music again. With the band figurehead taking over the reins again, you would think that this would portend good things. Instead, the album is kind of a disaster, with Brock leaning way, way too much into new wave pop to the point that it sounds inauthentic, as if he's chasing trends rather than assimilating them. However, and as usual, the single saves the album from being a total piece of crap, as the title track shows Calvert getting his inner Brian Ferry on with his quirky vocal phrasing and delivery, combined with the Brock Simon duo providing that old Hawkwind groove processed through new wave-ish synths as to make it sound like a more psychedelic Roxy music. Chris?
Yeah, 25 years rocks balls, but it's the only song that does. The rest of it is just dull and boring. And like you said, it's like he's trying to capture trends, but he's not even doing it well. And
Yeah.
he's not doing it with much energy. There's just a real lack of energy. And you have to tell the story here that they were starting to fall apart, and they recorded the next album that we're going to talk about, PXR 5, first. And
Mm,
then what happened was Simon House got hired by Bowie
mm,
to be his keyboardist for that period in 78, 79. And so he got hired away, and the other guys had quit, and then Si- uh, Bob Calvert went mentally ill and
yeah.
had to go on hiatus. And so they effectively disbanded for a few months. And then when they got back together, that's when they did Hawklords. And obviously they weren't really jousting with a with a fixed lance.
Yeah.
And so they were kind of a shell of themselves, and that because of all the struggles. And so 25 years is really maybe the best they could come up with, which is too bad. It's just it's the only flaming ship bomb on this, the only thing that even comes close to a flaming ship bomb on this record. Everything else is pretty good to awesome on this
Yeah.
list.
Next, the final album, okay, of this hot streak, really, as you said, Chris, is the next to last album, actually, if you go by the timeline, but it came out later. PXR 5 from 1979. Hawkwind ends the 1970s with a tighter, punchier lineup, probably the same lineup as Quark, Strangeness, and Charm, but it eschews new wave pop and finally embracing punk rock as they always seemed destined to do. You can hear this new ferocity and energy with opening track Death Trap, with Brock and company sounding like a band 10 years younger than they actually are at this time. The spacey cosmic reverie full of sound effects that this band was known for comes back for Uncle Sam is on Mars, but is still grounded and balanced by their newfound punk spirit. The piano-based Infinity is oddly one of the prettiest near ballads Brock ever wrote, while the punchy, intense jam of Robot sounds like what an Isaac Asimov short story would if it were performed by the Stranglers. There's
Yep.
a joy and a spirit in these up-tempo songs that make Hawkwind's sci-fi psychedelia fit in perfectly with punk and new wave, and in my opinion, this amounts to the last truly great Hawkwind album. Chris?
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff on this record. There's a couple of clunkers, but for the most part, it sounds like old Hawkwind. It sounds
Yeah,
like it's harkening back to the earlier records, Hall of the Mountain Grill and Do Re Mi and albums like that. It's harkening back to that, especially Uncle Sam's on Mars, and
yeah,
Robot and
yeah,
PXR 5, the
yeah,
title track. Yeah,
Right.
a lot of that's there. And what I love about this album is kind of a poetic, almost elegiac touch. They literally end the album with wind. That for the last
Yeah.
5 seconds you get whoosh, and that's how they go out in this original iteration of the band. And we call it original iteration because they kept coming back and they never really went away, right?
They never did. So this is what the ensuing decades of Hawkwind, 1980s, 90s, noughties, teens, and 20s. Yeah, they're still ongoing. Let's backtrack a little bit. So after 1979's PXR5, we go into the 1980s. Like so many bands and artists of their generation, Hawkwind suffered from a terrible case of 80s itis. That means their music in the 1980s royally fucking sucked. Paul McCartney, Neil Young, Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Eric Clapton, Lou Reed, David Bowie, the Rolling Stones, The Who, Black Sabbath, you name them, they suffered from it. In Dave Brock's case, the Hawkwind brand suffered commercially in a major way, as not even the band's most loyalist followers continued to buy their increasingly crappy albums. They bounced from Charisma Records to Bronze Records to RCA before settling on a pattern of bouncing from one small indie label to another with ever more dwindling record sales. In fact, Brock, in later interviews, expressed how close he was to ending Hawkwind in the middle of the decade. However, like generational peers such as Neil Young, Lou Reed, Eric Clapton, and Bob Dylan, Hawkwind bounced back in the 1990s with a series of critically well received records that reinvigorated their hardcore base while inspiring younger fans to go back and listen to their classic 1970s work. Unlike his generational peers, Brock did this not so much by repeating his old psychedelic space rock formula, but by altering to adapt to the current new music of the time, with 1992's Electric TP, 1995's Alien 4, and 1997's Distant Horizons. Hawkwind embraced electronic dance music styles and subgenres such as techno, house, and even drum and bass to add exotic textures to Hawkwind's sonic stew. This was done so as a natural progression in such a sense that by 2000's Space Brock, you could be forgiven for thinking this was an album by the Orb or the Chemical Brothers.
Uh,
In the 21st century, Hawkwind even trudged along. Well, they did. Since then, since the early 21st century, Hawkwind has trudged along as a popular live act, being essentially Dave Brock and a revolving cast of musicians, as well as a technologically advanced laser and light show. Since 2016, they've released an album almost every year on Cherry Red Records, a UK-based indie label specializing in punk and alternative rock. It's telling how important an influence Hawkwind was on those subgenres that the band fits right in with all the artists on that roster. Of course, none of these recent Hawkwind albums are groundbreaking or amazing. Dave Brock is 84 years old now and is pretty much coasting on his band's stylistic reputation. But very much like latter period Prince, you'll always be able to find 2 to 3 terrific songs tucked away in these Twilight era records. More important is that Dave Brock and indeed the Hawkwind name endure as symbols for countercultural alternative music that goes against the grain of conservative mainstream pop music. I mentioned earlier how many bands and artists they obviously inspired and influenced. They have lasted longer than the Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, the Eagles, Black Sabbath, and Steely Dan. Long may the hawk soar. Chris?
Yep, and I'm going to give you the last word on that. I can't really add to that. Long live Hawkwind, endlessly experimental, endlessly curious, endlessly entrepreneurial, I guess, in a sense, and they just keep on trucking. So there we go, there we go. So Hawkwind, special band. We hope that we've turned you on to them, and in this sober defense this unfortunately sober defense of Hawkwind. Boy, drugs, oh drugs. Yeah, and I do recommend this, folks. That I would say do we what we say in marketing is A/B testing. I would A/B test Space Ritual. Listen to it sober and then listen to it fucked up and see which one's the better experience, or it's and kind of compare notes about about the cerebralness that goes on when you're sober and the pure like wah when you're fucked up. So definitely encourage that. And with that said, folks, as we do at the end of these episodes, and Arturo did a wonderful job of promoting this episode on this. It's our Facebook Curmudgeonly community, where Art will put up all kinds of like weird YouTube videos about the artists that we're coming up to talk about, and we get plenty of engagement. Our friend Jeff Baker was pretty active this week up there. So get in on the fun with what we have going in our Curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/group/curmudgeonrock. Care to disagree with us about anything we've said about Hawkwind? Do you think they totally suck? Or do you think that that 25 years on is their best record? Anything that you have to say, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to engage. Give us some fan mail at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And like we've said a few times, we're going to have that Spotify playlist, and you'll be able to find the link to that in the episode description, wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Stitcher, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Apple. You'll be able to access that playlist, and it'll be a lot of Hawkwind music. I'm going to put all of Space Ritual on there, and then we'll have dribs and drabs and highlights aplenty from the rest.